Good morning. Welcome to the show. For the past 6 months, we've been preaching survival and thrival, helping the leaders of middle market companies make the right moves to come out of COVID stronger than before. Last week, we started shifting away from the survival and thrival series. Why? Because I'm tired of talking about the effing pandemic and I'm ready to move on. Really move back to helping leaders build kick-ass companies. I thought about renaming our video series No Excuses, because no matter what the world throws at us, we've got to figure out a way to do the best we can. But for now, I'll simply call it Let's Go, because I want to continue to preach offense. With that as a backdrop, I'm continuing to host intimate discussions with middle market thought leaders and providing peer-to-peer connections to help the leaders of entrepreneurial companies build great teams. So my guest this week is my good friend and serial entrepreneur, Clint Greenleaf. Clint has 3 successful starts and exits under his belt. He's currently the founder and CEO of Content Capital. Content Capital is in the content and publishing space. They help content leaders monetize their IP. Clint began his career at Deloitte before he realized that he is a very bad accountant. We actually have that in common. And he founded and later sold Greenleaf Book Group, Home Plate Peanut Butter, and Bambino Balls. Clint is an undergrad from Holy Cross. He sits on multiple boards and is a lifelong suffering Cleveland professional sports fan. Clint, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Kurt. And I love that you brought me in to start focusing on the positive of what comes next. I'm kind of tired of the whole COVID world too. So it's a whole lot of fun to be part of this next new phase.
So that word is no longer used on today's discussion. Fair enough? When we talk about the craziness that was, we'll call it 2020 instead of the pandemic or COVID. All right, here we go. So today we're going to be talking about the long game. We're going to be talking about leveraging content as part of your business plan, and really who the hell knows what else. Thankfully, Clint and I already talked about religion, politics, and sex earlier, yesterday, so we don't talk about that today. But Clint, almost anything else is on the board for today. But before we begin, I'd like to I usually give an update from the front lines from my work with the CEO forums that I've hosted since March. But here's the update I want to provide today. As we talked about before, 2020 has been a shit show in so many ways, from the pandemic to social unrest to devastating fires to multiple hurricanes to a nasty presidential election, as we're coming off of a nasty debate last night, as you and I talked about. Candidly, it feels a bit biblical at times. But the reality is that we're having to learn to deal with it because we have to find a way. So more and more I'm hearing from clients and friends and my wife, no excuses, figure it out. So let's start with that, Clint. I know you have many discussions with leaders and authors about managing through 2020 and trying to find a way. How are you and your peers seeing this shift over the last 30 to 60 days, something more positive?
Well, I think there's been kind of a new understanding that this whole idea of these uncertain times are just the new reality, which is fine, right? There's never really been certainty of any kind. We might have been deluded into thinking that previous eras were easier, and they were in a lot of respects. But we're not going to get back to a normal certain time when people are flying on planes with no masks and doing their own thing. So with all these new changes coming, we just need to recognize that life is uncertain. There's a lot of crap that can happen at any point in time. And our job is not to try and recreate certainty or live in a world where we just dream for that someday, but more to just kind of embrace this new world order that we're facing and try to figure out, how do we thrive? It's not my job to rechange the way that the world sees politics or the economy. It's my job to go out and kick a lot of butt.
That's a great point. Has there ever been certainty in the world?
Never. If you go back historically, 5,000 years ago, recorded human history, I think the first stone tablet said, oh crap, times are so much worse now than they were before. It's just been a constant refrain from people. Now we're a little more aware of it because you got a 24-hour news cycle, internet all the time, and Twitter and all the different sources provide us so much data. But we're just more aware of the fact that there's a lot of things going on. There was a lot of uncertainty during World War I, World War II, the Spanish flu, the plague, you name it. It's been part of human anatomy for years and really since the beginning of time.
If only Twitter was around during World War I, we'd have something to learn from.
Yeah, those metrics don't really apply too well.
So shifting to 2020, let's talk a little bit about the shift from, as we said, survival and thrival, but things like truly survival, PPP loans. How do I manage my way out of this? How do I make cuts to survive? we want to be shifting back to really what's next, how to survive in this new normal. Talk to me a little bit about that, about building great businesses versus, getting through the pandemic, if you will.
Yeah, I think really it's so easy to get caught up in what should I do today? What's on my to-do list? What's the immediate fire I need to put out? And in so many cases, these immediate fires take care of themselves. And as leaders of these businesses, our job is not to focus on what's the immediate, big, flashy, shiny new object. It's really to think long-term. So what is a long game? Why are we in this business? What is the whole point of being here? I think we can all recognize that it looks like things are getting better and 2020 will eventually end. So what happens not in January of 2021, but what do you want your business to be in 2025 or 2030? Or what do you want your legacy to be at your eulogy? So if we step back and start thinking much bigger picture, we can make better choices and focus on what's really important instead of the idea of, boy, should I focus on forgiveness today on the PPP loan, or should I try and wait until the government changes their mind? Don't worry about that. Spend your time right now building a business that you want to own in 2030. Whether or not you do is not really the issue. Right now, the idea is build that starting today.
I like that attitude. In fact, in several of my previous episodes, I've quoted my good friend Craig Wiley with Transcend Group when he said very, very early on in 2020, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to re-examine everything. And as I said, you're on the board of many companies. You work with many opportunities. In what ways have you seen that play out? I know you're talking about a 10-year plan. Is that how you've seen it play out, or what other ways have you seen it play out?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of that's building out. I'm on a bank board, and so we never would have thought that PPP would come through. And the same way the financial crisis of 2008-9 caused so much stress on banks, really the 2020 crisis has made a huge win for a lot of small community banks, and our bank was no different. Keystone Bank in Austin, Texas has been a big winner doing a ton of PPP loans. That was actually a huge windfall for us, strangely enough. The bank grew from 30 million 2 years ago to 340 million currently now. That's been a great year for us, and there was a lot of opportunity that came through all this trouble. Other companies I'm on the board of too have seen this as well, where there's a wonderful opportunity, would be it stay-at-home people buying more products or people wanting to brand themselves more. Really, the idea is not to say, how can we try and thrive through this short little window of time? It's how do we find our goal in 2030, in 2050, and then how do we start driving the business today? And to your friend's point, to Craig's point, there are some really great opportunities. The same way that there were some great buys in the market in March and April, same idea. There are some great opportunities in your business right now. And if you stop focusing on the fear-based concerns and start looking at how do we actually make a big long-term smart choice, that's my best advice is think today about what advice would you give yourself in 10 years and say, well, I really wish I would have done this. Okay, then go out and do that. I think you know that in your business. You just don't want to think about it because it's a little bit more complex, focusing on the small items.
That's a tough question to maybe answer, but it's also a tough thing to visualize. So that's good advice. So Clint, follow very closely because I'm about to make a very professional segue. You're going to be so enamored with my amazing segue. So you ready? All right. Transitioning from the 2020 crap show to leveraging content to share your clients' stories. You previously shared with me that many people will come to you because they want to write a book about COVID and COVID experience. Maybe it's lessons learned during the pandemic or some such. In what ways are you helping them shift their mindset from a passion project about the pandemic to something bigger and longer lasting?
Right. So I think the idea is that a book is usually going to take 6 to 18 months to get produced, right? So if you think right now, if you wrote a book in March about COVID and PPE and all the ideas and all the things that we were thinking back then, think of how outdated that would be. Think if you wrote a book in the summer about going back to school in the fall and how the fall would cause all these different issues. We didn't really know. And so rather than trying to think about this as a snapshot in time and say, I really want to write a book about how to get better, cleanliness and contamination cleaning. Well, that doesn't really do anything for anybody. Let's think bigger picture. And the real value we add is not being able to solve a temporary problem like how to get more masks. The real problem we can solve for people is thinking about things strategically. So a book, in my mind, is something that we want to encourage people to think much bigger picture. And you can use the examples of 2020 and all the different fun that we've had this year. But it's not about these technical small little aspects as much as it's playing that out in the long term, saying, here's the big strategy that was able to win.
Well, so sticking with that for a minute, we talked about leveraging content as part of your business plan and beyond books. Let's start with why that's important. You mentioned earlier about taking a 10-year view. Why, I guess, is why are they trying to write a book? Why are they trying to tell their story? Why do you want to get their story out there? What's their long game? Talk to me about what that means when it comes to content and when it comes to books or other ways to get your content out there.
Yeah, so if we go back about 20 years, for about 500 years of recorded human history, you had Gutenberg who put ink on paper, and that was roughly 550 years ago. And then in about the year 2000, we started to find other ways to share content. There were books on tape, and there were a few other key ways to do it. But for 500 years, we had this idea that it was just books, right? It was just paper. It was just, we're going to put ink on paper and you tell your story. One crazy little fact, the reason why most books are so long and so thick is not that the author wants to write a 300-page book, but it's because in the bookstore shelf where most books were sold, you couldn't see a very thin book. So the publisher would say, hey, it's great how you've got a few pages of this book, but I need you to add a lot more so the spine of the book is thick enough and you can actually read the content of it. So add 300 pages of garbage to it. And that often happens, and that's why so many books have so many case studies, and they've really added that in there. Over the last 20 years, we've been able to start cutting content down, right? Twitter's a great example of this. Podcasts are a great example of this. There are so many new and different ways to share content that a book does work in a lot of respects. But there's a lot of other ways to share that idea. And so we try to marry the best way to share content, the best medium for that, with the long-term goals of the client. And that may mean that they want to grow their business. It may mean that they want to build themselves as a thought expert, or maybe they just want to be a New York Times bestseller. But no matter what their goals are, our job is to try and help them use content as an asset and then properly manage that for them.
Well, you just answered for me why I think most business books are 80% fluff, 20% really, really good content, and 80% fluff. I just wish they would tell me which 20% I should read before I start reading the book.
Yeah, it's a darn shame they don't do that. The problem is usually it's a proposal that the author gives the publisher in most cases. That's 20 to 40 pages. And that's where they say, here's what my book's going to be about. And that's what the publisher buys for a lot of money. And then they say, this is great. Now add a bunch of case studies and sprinkle them in there. Well, that doesn't really do any good. If you can find the proposal, that's always going to get you the best meat of the content.
Well, that's real world advice from a guy who's been in the publishing business for over 15 years. So
23, I think now.
Oh, wow. I didn't know you were that old.
Wow. We're going to play that game?
All right. Yeah, I'm going to lose that game pretty quick. Hey, in just a second, I want to ask you further about content as part of your business plan. And I'll even ask you some fun client stories if you're willing to share. But first, I'd like to remind people, if you're just joining us, we're continuing our video interview series with thought leaders from across the country. We're encouraging entrepreneurial leaders to play offense to strengthen their business and build a kick-ass company. We're discontinuing our Survival and Thrival series and moving forward. Our working title is simply Let's Go, because we want to preach offense and build these great companies. My guest today is Clint Greenleaf. He's 3-time successful entrepreneur, founder of Content Capital, which is helping leaders monetize their content IP and tell their unique stories. So, all right, Clint, talk to me a little bit more. Let's go into depth of what kind of things are you seeing when it comes to content. What are the keys that you're seeing? What do you see for the next 5 to 10 years? If I'm building a 10-year plan, what does my content plan look like?
Sure. Well, a lot of it comes down to your consumer and where you want to meet them, right? So if you want to write a novel or tell a long-form story, a book probably makes a lot of sense. But if instead you're a technology person, a book is probably going to be out of date before it goes to the printer. And certainly by the time the printer finishes, it takes about 8 to 12 weeks for the printer to do a book. So you've got to think about the best way to share the content, right? There's a great knot tying app that's out there. It's a stop frame animation app. It's called Grog, Grog. And what they do is they show you stop frame animations of actually how you tie a tie. That is infinitely more useful than a book on knot tying, where you try and read it and figure out what loop A does to side B and it just doesn't make any sense. So really it's about figuring out who the consumer is, why you actually want to share this information with them, and then knowing what your win is. If you don't know what a win is, that's okay. Most people don't. But please don't tell me you want to write a book if you don't know why you want to write a book. There's no reason to create content if you don't know who cares about it. And in some cases, by the way, it's just cathartic, right? You just want to tell your story. You want to share it with the world, print 5 copies and be done with it. My grandfather did that. It was an interesting story. We put his book out for him and printed 5 copies, gave it to his kids and grandkids, and that was the end of it. It was a simple, easy book. Didn't need to go too far in depth with it. Sometimes that's the right answer. But for business owners, really, if you say you think you need a book to grow your business, I want to see the tangible goals that you think should happen in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. And then I can tell you if that's even possible or if it's a pie in the sky and not really reasonable.
Well, that's good counsel. I thought about writing a book for my family story, and I've got 3 kids and a wife, and I don't know if I would even be able to produce 4 copies and it will be read. So might fall on deaf ears. But I do appreciate what you're saying. That's exactly right. No one's people expect to be on the bestseller list. That's just not going to happen in most cases. It's what are your other motives?
Well, and to be fair, it's not that there's not good books written, right? But there are 7,000 books a day released into the market in the U.S. That's 7,000 yesterday, 7,000 tomorrow. That's today. Have you heard about 7,000 books? You're not going to hear about most of these. A lot of them are really strange books, like Aunt May's Trip to Coney Island in 1937. Nobody cares about that book, right? But if you have a really good business book, it's hiding on the shelf, the virtual shelf on Amazon, right with her book about Coney Island. So you've got to find a way to differentiate yourself and be able to explain why having a book is a good thing. This is like, we're not in 1995 with websites anymore. When people said, I've got a website, and that was supposed to be a win. Well, great, you've got a website. Who's going to it? If you don't have content that people want to go out and get, there's really no point in creating.
Well, let's play a game. I see a book behind you. I know that's one of the books that you've written. It's called Give, Save, Spend with the 3 Little Pigs. So my game is tell us about your book in 20 seconds and maybe the top 3 things, because I don't have time to read your book, Clint.
Yeah, no, it's really long. It's a 28-page kids book, so I get it.
Lots of pictures, I hope.
Yes.
I know there is.
The guy who drew Dora and Little Mermaid did the book for us, did the illustration. So it's a sequel to the 3 Little Pigs and helps kids learn the give, save, spend concept of taking their money and putting it in the 3 buckets. I've spent a good bit of time building a business around this called Pigs and Bricks, where we teach parents how to teach their kids about money so they have financially responsible kids in the future.
And by the way, we're going to put that link to that book in our chat box, so you can check it out. It's a really cool book. We don't teach our kids enough about financials, and Clint's done a great job of making it very easy to understand in 3 Little Pig fashion. So pick another book on your whatever your closest book is, and give us the same thing. I know you're a voracious reader, and you've been in the space.
I know how to read, and that's a big starting point. So this is a fun one. This is 1,000 Ways to Make $1,000 Bucks, the book that Warren Buffett memorized in 1936 when it came out. It's a fun book, especially if you want your kids to have a good idea on entrepreneurship. But some of them don't apply, like shoe shine stands. Not as big of a deal anymore as they used to be, but still a fun one. That's a good book.
All right, 1 more or 2 more.
2 more. Okay, so this one is Deep Work. It is a very difficult concept, at least for me, because I love being distracted. I'm pretty good at the whole ADD game. Deep work is all about...
Here's a squirrel.
Yes, exactly. It's about focusing hard for 4 hours on a topic and how you train yourself to do that and how you get good at that. I do have a good one for you, Kurt. How many ADD people does it take to change a light bulb?
800.
Want to ride bikes? All right, last book. This one will mess with you as well. It's called Why We Sleep. This is probably the greatest self-help book I've ever read, and it's fantastic. It will make you get 8 hours of sleep and or feel incredibly guilty about not getting it. But sleep is an awesome tool that we are not using enough, and that's been my big win of 2020 has been getting more sleep.
Can you give me a synopsis? You mentioned a quote the other day from that book. What was the paraphrased quote, or you can read the quote?
Yeah, the paraphrased quote is you'll be funnier, smarter, better looking, and more successful in your life if you get sleep. And if you don't, you're going to die quickly, be fat, ugly, and really lose your brain as quickly as possible.
Well, that explains a lot because I'm not getting enough sleep. So good advice.
Now we can all be empathetic for you. That's good.
There you go. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. I want to hear a few stories, if you don't mind sharing client stories. I learn through stories, others especially, and I don't mind the crap show stories, right? So I can learn from someone else's hard lessons. You got any for me?
Sure. So one goes back to my old firm, Greenleaf Book Group. We had a speaker client, Rich Horwath, who brought up this great book to us. And Rich was a speaker who wanted to get his book out there to be successful, right? He was hoping he would grow his speaking career. He did a wonderful job of creating a beautiful book. And then we didn't really know what to do with it. We put it in bookstores and it wasn't winning. We got a chance to put him into bookstores in the airports, which was a huge win. And what Rich did then with that book was he found that by being in airports, he had the decision makers who he was looking for. This is back pre-2020 when people would fly in airplanes. But the decision makers would go to the airports, they'd look at the book and say, this guy looks pretty good. I'll buy it on the flight, read it on the plane. And the entire book was basically a sales pitch for him coming in as a consultant and being a speaker for their business. So it was a wonderful biz dev tool, and all the costs associated with creating the book and going into airports was actually really worthwhile for him. And that was a big win for us also to be able to figure out how that could work so well. That's probably now 12 years ago, but that was a big win for us at the time.
Nice.
And it certainly paid for itself for him as well.
And I know you've got a personal story from your very first book that you published. Give us a little bit of a background on that one.
Yeah, so as you alluded to, I was a terrible accountant. I did pass the CPA exam, but it took a long time and several tries. But after I got out, I got hurt in the Marine Corps ROTC program in college. And so I couldn't do that anymore and didn't really know what to do. I applied to the big 6 firms in accounting and was able to get a bunch of offers. My friends who all knew that I wasn't a very good accountant kind of wondered what had happened. And I told them it's because I tied my tie and shined my shoes, did everything the Marines taught me how to do. And they said, well, if you're so smart, you should write a book. And so as a bet, I wrote a 28-page booklet, literally on how to tie a tie and how to shine your shoes. It was a pretty light read by all accounts, and started selling that book. And that book was the impetus for me not only leaving Deloitte, but also starting Greenleaf Book Group. We sold about 10,000 copies of that through the mail at $5 a pop. Learned how to build a list and then market back to that list. And it allowed me, after 7 very long, hard months at Deloitte, to retire and start a publishing company.
I love that story. And it actually is counterintuitive to your previous advice is plan 10 years out, because there's no freaking way that you planned 10 years out to build a publishing company. So you were able to take what life presented you and make the best of it.
Yeah, keep in mind, at 22, I couldn't plan a year out, right? I had really no idea. My advice now to 22-year-olds is try to think out 6 months, 12 months, right? But for people as old as you and me, I think we should start thinking 10 years out.
All right. So, hey, we talked earlier about the crap show that is 2020. I'm a silver lining guy. I know positives come out of even the craziest situations. Share with me a 1 or 2 positives that you either have seen coming out of 2020 or you expect to see coming out of 2020.
I'll tell you, it's hard not to go personal. I absolutely love the fact that I've had dinner with my family probably 5 nights a week on average this year now. We've been able to take some family trips and just get away. I've got family time. My kids are now 13, 11, and 9. I wouldn't have had this gift. And it's been wonderful for me to get this family time. I've got the luxury of being able to work remotely, so I can do that from just about anywhere. And this was something that, as you normally drive around to volleyball and football and baseball practices, it's a lot more fun now for me to be able to enjoy this idea of having a year of time with my kids that I'll never be able to recreate. I don't know that they'll be able to recreate that as well. So that was my big happy takeaway. And I know that a lot of people have suffered through it, but that was me trying to find the silver lining and really enjoying that.
I think that's a great silver lining, and it's great that you have that positive attitude about that. You're right; it has been crazy for folks, but even the crazy of times have been. There are some positives if we test our mind and find them. And that family time has been amazing for me as well. And candidly, I love sports, and I've got sports playing boys, but I've really enjoyed going camping and going swimming and going to the lake and doing things that aren't running around to, the various sports activities. So yeah, you hit it on the head.
Yeah, taking hikes is a whole lot of fun with the family, especially if you're not usually a hiking family. But getting that chance to be outside and do that was really great for us as well.
Exactly. All right. So how about tell me one thing that you've done well in 2020, and if you're willing to admit it, maybe a foul up, something you wish you could do over.
Wow. Okay. So the one that I've done well, that's easy. There's about 34 that I'd like to do differently. But the one that I've done well, I've made a point of trying to take every business call that I can outside walking. So if you're stuck on a call with me, I'm sorry, you're going to hear road noise. You're going to probably have a little static as I go through bad cell signals. But I've probably been averaging about 20,000, 21,000 steps a day. this year, and I try and get outside as often as possible. This might be the longest that I've actually stood in one place this year so far. So that's been a very big win for me. I think as far as things that I wish I would have done differently, I wish I would have paid a little bit more attention to how I could actually be successful in 10 years, starting in March. I started thinking about that after I got through some of that tough slug. I spent a lot of time in March and April stressing and worrying about it. And then I kind of had to reset. So I would love to restart and start seeing these downturns of any kind really as an opportunity sooner rather than later. I think I took too long in being able to do it. I think another thing I did this year that I'd like to redo differently is I waited until about March or April to stop paying attention to social media. And my lack of attention to Facebook and Twitter has made me a lot happier. So I would have suggested doing that a lot sooner.
We've been on that bandwagon for a while, but not as long as March or April. But man, I tell you, it'll ease your attention. You stop paying attention to all that crap. Don't even watch the major news. I mean, everybody's got their own spin and angle. I don't trust anybody anymore. Yeah,
I think the idea of news giving you facts is out the window. It's been probably 2 months since I've watched a full newscast, and I'm just a lot happier because of it. Oddly enough, the world is still doing what it's doing, but I'm just not brought into that vortex of insanity.
That's right. All right, let's one more question. That is, tell me, how about something that we don't know about you from reading your LinkedIn profile? Some snippet. It would be just our secret.
Just our secret that we're going to put on the internet and share with the world.
Yeah, no one's watching the internet anymore. You already said that.
Yeah. Although your channel gets lots of viewers.
That's right. Tens, if not dozens of viewers.
Yes, exactly. All right, something fun about me that you probably don't know. I'm fluent in Ukrainian. My grandparents escaped Stalin in World War II, and I grew up speaking Ukrainian in my house along with English. But there are now dozens of people in Texas with whom I can communicate, and that's been a whole lot of fun.
Wow, I love that.
Once in a while, you run into somebody who can still speak it.
Well, can you say, Kurt, you're a great-looking silver fox? I
cannot. I mean, more accurately, I will not. But I could try and piece together the phrase of that. But
all right, perfect. But we'll take your word for it then. All right. So, hey, Clint, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate what you're doing to help the entrepreneurial community. Keep it up, and really excited to work with you at Content Capital. And to all of you, thank you for joining us. I'll be back next week with another edition of Let's Go. My guest will be commercial real estate guru Clay Grubb. We're going to be talking about real estate opportunities and pitfalls, and I'm sure we'll cover a lot of lessons learned. Then, in the next 2 weeks, I've got Mark Moses, who is CEO and founder of CEO Coaching International. And then the following week, it'll be Mark Winters, who's a best-selling author, co-author of one of my favorite go-to business books, Rocket Fuel. So really excited about that. So until next week, no excuses, and let's go.